Good afternoon and welcome to the House Committee on State Government and Elections. Today is Thursday, January 27th, 2022. Welcome back. We have 6 bills on our calendar tonight that are scheduled for hearing and or consideration. House Bill 6601, 6622, 6661, 7031, 7033, and 7146. I move that we hold all 6 of those bills for further study. Is there a second? Second. Moved and seconded by Vice Chair Messier. Can we have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk? Attendance. We could do that first, too. Attendance?
Chairman Shanley.
Here.
First Vice Chair Messier. Here. Second Vice Chair Corvese.
Here.
Representative Ackerman. Here. Representative Agello.
Here.
Representative Baginski.
Present.
Representative Felix.
Present.
Representative Hull. Present. Representative Kennedy. Present. Representative Knight. Representative McGaw. Here. Representative Nardone. Here. Representative Newberry.
Here.
Representative Shawcross-Smith.
Here.
Representative Tansey.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Now we can revisit that motion to hold all 6 bills on the calendar for further study. Is there a second?
Yes.
Seconded by Vice Chair Messier. Madam Clerk, roll call vote, please.
Chairman Shanley.
Yes.
First Vice Chair Messier.
Yes.
Second Vice Chair Corvese.
Yes.
Representative Ackerman.
Yes.
Representative Agello.
Yes.
Representative Baginski.
Yes.
Representative Felix.
Yes.
Representative Hull.
Yes.
Representative Kennedy.
Yes.
Representative Knight. Representative McGaw.
Yes.
Representative Nardone. Yes. Representative Newberry.
Yes.
Representative Shawcross-Smith.
Yes.
Representative Tansey.
Yes.
Thank you. The first bill that we are going to consider tonight is House Bill 6622 from Chairman Corvese. This changes the process of nominating candidates for the general election by replacing the political party primary with a primary general election. Chairman Corvese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting this in play. For the sake of expediency, one of the people I understand who would like to testify is former Ambassador Paolino. If, through the chair, if you'd allow him to speak first, and then I could say a few words about the bill.
Sure.
Okay?
Of course. Mr. Paolino, come on up.
One time I didn't need these things. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I want to commend Representative Corvese for introducing this legislation. He and I have had a number of conversations about it. My concern has always been that if we look at the present day situation where we have, I think, about 5 candidates for governor in the Democratic primary, quite frankly, one of them could be the nominee of the party and get 28% of the vote. 72% of the people could have voted for somebody else. And when we see other states all have different versions of this, and if you go to California, they have the Republicans and the Democrats together, which quite frankly I like. Put everybody together, let them all run, 2 highest vote getters run against each other. But you'd have to change the Constitution here in Rhode Island to do that. But in the Democratic primary and Republican primary, you wouldn't have to change the Constitution. You can do that by an enabling legislation. Now this year, you have redistricting taking place. Some people say to me, oh, there's not enough time. Well, why? You don't even know what district you're in. Nobody knows what their boundaries are. So as part of election reform, you could do the redistricting package along with election reform package. And then if people are in the Democratic primary or Republican primary, and if it's 32%, 30%, 28%, 26%, 2 highest vote getters, maybe a week or 2 weeks after, run against each other as the 2 highest vote getters. And then that person that wins that would have over 50% of the vote, and they become the nominee of the party. Let me give you some examples. And I'm going to go back in history. Maybe only Johnny Lombardi will know some of this. Representative Lombardi will know this. But in 1974, Mayor Joe Dawley was in a primary. He got 34% of the vote. Francis Brown got 29% of the vote. Francis Darrigan got 25%, and Charlie Pizzatoro got 10%. Dawley, with 34%, was weak. His own party, 66% of the people in the Democratic Party had voted against him. He ran against Buddy Cienki. Buddy Cienki became the mayor. That's what happened back in 1974. If you want to continue talking about the general election, Cienki ended up winning in that year with 48% of the vote. Dawley got 47%. And then John Smallins and Gene Coughlin got 2% each. And that's what happened. And those independents kind of tipped the scale of who the next mayor of Providence was going to be back in 1974. In 1982, in the general election, our capital city in Providence, Mayor Cienki got 43%, Frank Darrigan got 41%, Fred Lippitt got 15%. So here you have a 4-year term, and you rule that community for 4 years with less than 50% of the people voting for you. That's the general election. Let me tell you, in 1984, when I was a candidate, in the primary, I got 54% of the vote. And then the other candidates got 17, 14, 8, and 5. In the general election, I won with 40% of the vote. Fred Lippitt got 39.84%, and Kevin McKenna got 19%. I would have had no problem going head-on-head with Mr. Lippitt. I think I would have done better, but the city would have done better if they had a mayor that had over 50% of the vote. Now, if you go to 1990, and I'll talk about the governor's race for a moment, in the Democratic primary, Bruce Sutherland got 40% of the vote, Frank Flaherty got 32%, I got 27%. Now, Sutherland went on and won, but quite frankly, maybe that should have been a head-on-head race between he and Mayor Flaherty in those days. And then I would have dropped out, and they would have been able to go, and then you would have had a good amount of a majority supporting the nominee of the party. Let's look recently, 2014. Gina Raimondo got 42%, Angel Tavares got 29%, Clay Pell got 26%. I think no matter what party you're from, you want to have a majority of those people supporting your candidacy. In the general election, we had a governor, Gina Raimondo, again, 2014, 40% of the vote. You look at when Link Chafee became governor, he had about 36% of the vote. Yeah, 36%. There's something wrong there. We, as voters, want to make sure that a majority votes. Now, in New York, they do a thing called ranking. Quite frankly, they can make deals. The candidates can make deals. Two candidates that aren't in first or second place can say, hey, I'll give you my second vote. You have your supporters give me your second vote. And that's what they tried to do in New York, and I'm glad it didn't work for them. But they tried it. So I say, forget the rank voting. If you want to change the Constitution, which I think would be wise, let everybody, Republicans and Democrats, nobody's going to say when they go in the voting pool, if the voting booth, if they are Republican or Democrat. You don't have to declare yourself. Everybody goes in at the same time. You may have two Republicans end up running against each other. You may have two Democrats, maybe a Democrat and a Republican. But at least it's a fairer system that everybody goes in at one shot. But again, you need to change the Constitution. So to me, the second best alternative of what you can do this year and make it part of your whole redistricting platform, because you have enough time to do all this, don't let the Republicans have a nominee with less than 50%. Don't let the Democrats have a nominee with less than 50%. Do a runoff. See what other states are doing. See if it's been fair, if it's got a good history of doing it. But I think if you have a candidate with 28% of the vote that's the leading candidate, another candidate's 27%, and everybody else is below that, let the two top vote getters go against each other, and let somebody with over 50% be the nominee of that respected party. So that's why I'm here today. I benefited from a short term winning 40%. But quite frankly, it would have been a lot better, and I would have been able to get more things done if I had over 50% of the people supporting me when I was mayor of the city of Providence. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Representative Tanzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to, because the bill itself was a little bit on the confusing side, and I'm trying to put it into practical terms. So we would essentially be eliminating party primaries.
No, you'd have a party primary with what the bill that Dr. Corvese has in. The primary will still take place. You'd have a Democratic primary and
I
the two top, let's say the gubernatorial primary, the two top vote getters will have a second primary. They'll have one primary. If you don't get 50%, you go to a runoff. You can have it a week after, 2 weeks after, whatever you think is appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, may I intervene?
Sure.
Representative Sands, would you mind? So, the bill before us, Ambassador, is a work in progress, let's say. Yes, you and I have had a number of conversations, I've had a number of conversations with a number of people regarding the fact that over time, and it was interesting you brought up 74 because I was there for that, that individuals are elected in the general election with less than 40%. And, you know, we talk about inclusion, we talk about having everyone participate in the process. The bill before you, Representative Tanzi, is correct that is not exactly the way you're describing, because there were some changes.
Okay?
This is the forum within which we would tweak this bill, change this bill, somehow make it better. But what's before us is actually a primary where all candidates would run, Democrat, Republican, Independent, et cetera. All voters would vote, no matter their affiliation. Then the top two would go to the general election.
I'm for either one.
So I just wanted to make sure, because I know what you were thinking of, but,
Yes.
but that could be an iteration for another day. So what's before us is basically a template for discussion, and, but I think the concept, I think everyone here understands what I'm trying to do, okay? And I know it needs some tweaking, but what I'm trying to do is essentially have an all-inclusive primary, and I put that in quotes, where everyone runs, everyone votes. And then in the general, you have the top two. And then you will get your 50% plus one, and someone will have a majority. And that's basically what I have the intention in front of us. One other thing. There was some incorrect comments on the Twitterverse regarding the submission of this bill. This bill was submitted June 24th of last year, before there was a number of gubernatorial candidates that were out there. Also before there was a number of primary candidates out there. So this was actually in the hopper for a couple of months before its submission of June 24th. Why do I say that? Because I don't want anyone to think that this is a response to a present primary situation. This is a response to correct something that has been what I consider to be incorrect for a while. I think I've made that clear, that the submission was June 24th of last year. Thank you.
I didn't realize you were on Twitter. Any other questions for Ambassador Paolino? Representative Tanzi.
For the chairman, or for the vice chair, what is, if you're looking for someone to get over 50%, what would become of write-in candidates? Write-in candidates?
Again, I don't think there'd be a problem with write-in candidates. I don't think that you'd have right now, I don't think you can have a write-in candidate for primaries. If I'm correct, you cannot have write-in candidates for primaries. You can have write-in candidates for general elections. I don't see that changing. But again, that's up to discussion for the committee.
But even in the general election then, if you're saying that you're looking to find somebody who has more than 50%, your goal is that just in the primary then?
So are you saying, so what you're saying is it may be logical to have write-in candidates for the primary, but ban write-in candidates from the election? And if that's what you're looking to do,
It is
I'm
not,
wondering
just
if-
to be clear, I'm just trying to game it out. I'm not making a recommendation in either way.
I know that, but I'm trying to follow your logic.
Right.
That if you're concerned, as I am, about the 50% plus one, then depending on both the Constitution and whether or not it would be constitutional, whether or not you would have write-ins for the primary but no write-ins for the election.
Because you'd be back in that same position. with
Correct.
Write-ins for the general.
Representative Agello?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for the sponsor, I think. We have a letter in the committee documents from Jordan Goyette, I believe, suggesting that it has happened in California with this sort of law, that the general election has ended up with 2 Republican candidates or 2 Democratic candidates.
That's correct.
And you foresee that as a possibility with this bill?
Is it a possibility?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Representative McGaugh?
I'm just curious, in other states where they have done similar things, is there any information about the rate of participation in elections and whether or not it has impacted that?
I know they do this in Georgia, and I'm sure that we can probably get that for you. I can get that for you. I don't have that with me. And I do believe there are other states too, but Georgia comes to mind.
Representative Newberry?
I don't know exactly what Georgia does, but I thought they had runoffs after the general election, as we found out after the last presidential election, we had the 2 Senate seats. But do they have runoffs after their primaries?
Again, I'm not sure about that.
Because as a general, my gut reaction to this is, I don't have a problem with the idea of getting to 50% in November, and if you don't, having a runoff. I'm really not sure I'm a fan of doing it in the primaries. Partly because the state is so lopsided in one direction. I don't know how this would play out. I thought the suggestion of doing it each primary, and that's not what the bill does,
Through the chair.
is interesting. But
Through the chair to Representative Newberry, if I may. Are you concerned about statewide races or local races with regard to that?
more local races, actually, but I'd have to give it more thought. But, I mean, I'm not saying I'm opposed to this. My
understand.
gut reaction is not in support of it. I often agree with you in a lot of things. A lot of your electoral reforms I don't, but maybe
Say
I'll
that
come
again?
around. I often agree with you in a lot of things. A lot of your electoral reforms I don't, but maybe I'll come around on this one.
Well, we may see things a little differently, Representative Newberry.
Representative Tansey?
One parting thought is, I'm quite sure that it's in Louisiana, and it's if 50% isn't achieved, then they do an immediate, they call it a jungle runoff, and the top 2 vote getters then go into a very short time turnaround. But I believe that the Georgia one was something different because it was a replacement, and they had to, so that their just timeline was off with the general election. But, it's actually called a jungle primary, and then whoever the top 2 vote getters are go head-to-head for the general. So just for another model, I don't know the specifics of it, but another thing to look at.
Anyone else with a question or comment for Ambassador Paolino? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your attention.
Next witness we have signed up is Guy Dufault. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Guy Dufault. I am not here today representing any of my clients. I want everybody to know that. In fact, most of my clients are probably not too happy that I'm here testifying in this bill because they've had the largesse of the system. I'm here to support 6622 because I think it's the step in the 21st century we need to take to get better voter participation and get more people involved in the system. I've spent 48 years in electoral politics in Rhode Island, been the executive director of the Democratic Party. I was twice elected chairman of the state party, so from a party perspective, a lot of people would think that I would not be in support of this, but our primary system could be improved. We don't have a closed primary here where it's just the Democrats electing Democrats or Republicans just electing Republicans. Our semi-closed system allows for everybody to vote, including Republicans voting in a Democrat with a 30-day disaffiliation, as well as the opposite occurring. And we've had that happen here. What we really need to do is we really need to drum up more people voting in our primary process. In the last 2 decades, the majority of our seats at the state level have not been decided in a general election. They've been decided in the primary. Less than 20% of our people vote in primaries. So in a state that has 715,000 registered voters, we're electing people with 120, last election was 118,000, the election before that was 126,000, all less than 20%, 16 and 18% respectively. That, I don't think is really great government. And to answer some of the questions, because I do know this issue, there's 2 states that do it the way that Dr. Corvese's bill presents itself. The state of Washington and the state of California. Oregon's about to pass it. There are 2 states that have a separate system, which is Georgia and Louisiana, which does the runoff that you're referring to. So they have a primary system, then they have a general election. If nobody reaches 50, they have a subsequent runoff. That's how Representative Warnock, and that's how we took over Georgia in the United States Senate, was with the runoff seats. But in actuality, ours is a very simple system. It's a nonpartisan. Everybody gets into the primary. Everybody can vote in the primary. And everybody goes forward with the top 2 vote getters, whether they have a majority or not. They can have the simple plurality. But then in the general election, you put the top 2 people on the ballot to give the general election more meaning. Because now you've got the people in the general election that were chosen by this nonpartisan primary. It has increased voter performance in the primaries in both California and Washington. It has not improved, truth be told, it has not improved general election performance. Those numbers have stayed pretty consistent. But in the primaries, it's really spiked the numbers in the primary. That's what we should be doing. If we're going to have the majority of our seats in Rhode Island, and this is heresy for me as a former Democratic chairman to be saying this, because half my clients either don't have an opponent or they have a token opponent and they roll right into the general election. But the fact of the matter is it's not the best way to do elections in the 21st century. And the best way to do it is to get the most possible people to the polls and end up with the 2 best people at the end. The 2 best people meaning those 2 that score the highest in a 5-way, 6-way, 8-way, whatever it is. In some of the Republican districts, it's going to be 2 Republicans. That's the fact. In most of the state, it's going to be 2 Democrats because we're more heavily Democratic. But I think if you go out to Scituate and you do this, you're going to get 2 Republicans all the time in this system. If you're in Pawtucket, you're going to get two Democrats. But everybody votes. You don't have to worry about disaffiliations. You don't have to worry about crossover votes. You don't have to worry about the shenanigans that take place in our present primary system, where if you don't like somebody, you get Republicans to disaffiliate, or you get Democrats to disaffiliate and vote in Republican primaries. It's really can be a mess. And I've worked on over 300 state and local campaigns in Rhode Island. Now, that's a product of age. I'm the oldest person in the room, and it is a product of age. But over those 300 campaigns, I realized where the system failed. And our system is failing because we're putting too many people, we're determining the fate of our elected government in a primary that's drawing 16 or 18% of the people. We need to get more people engaged in the primary process. Running these bipartisan primaries does that. It gets more people involved. That's statistically proven in the 2 states that have done it. There are another 6 states right now that are entertaining this legislation. And I can tell you by the time, we would be at the start of this curve, but what I can say to you is that's where the 21st century is heading, more participation. We do a great job in Rhode Island with voter registration, 715,000 people out of 1,000,001. That is terrific. But we don't vote them. And particularly when you're in a non-presidential year, we really fall off. We went under 50% for the first time in a while. So we need to get more people engaged. We need to make them have choices. And you get the two best choices under Dr. Corvese's proposed legislation because everybody's looking at them. It gets people engaged in the system earlier, and everybody gets to vote. And quite frankly, as a person who's runs these campaigns and strategizes for people, it can be extraordinarily difficult, even like a Republican. You get 7 weeks. You know, usually it's a Democratic primary. About 90% of our primaries in Rhode Island over the last decade have been Democratic primaries. Very rarely do you ever get a Republican primary. And then they only have 7 weeks to try to drum up support and get things done. So this is not this does not hurt people the way, you know, in California the big argument was this was going to hurt progressives, and in Washington it was the opposite. It was going to hurt Republicans. At the end of the day, it's putting forth the best possible product that you can put forth to the voters to get as many people to vote as possible. And I think I speak strongly of it, and I think it's something that we're going to see in every single state, and we can be ahead of the curve or we can be behind the curve. And with that, I'd open myself up to questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. DeVault. How are you, sir?
Representative Filippi, my pleasure.
Mine too. Mine too. Are you aware of jungle primaries anywhere that are this early in September? This early?
Yeah, the jungle primary in California actually occurs in May, and I believe Washington is June. So they actually start a little early. If I had my druthers, I would have it then as well. I would push them up. Then it allows the two to actually have a race for 5 or 6 months so people can be determinative. We're one of the few states that back it up into September.
Understand. The low primary turnout numbers you described in the beginning of your testimony is what concerns me.
The what?
The low, oh geez, sorry. The low primary turnout
Yes.
in September is what concerns me, that those low numbers would be determining who would go on to the general. And I'm concerned about the disadvantaging minority parties.
Yeah, right
doing
now,
that,
an 18 and 16% turnout is determining almost 70% of the people elected in Rhode Island. So the argument would be, we need to get more people involved in the primary. How do you get more people involved? Open up the primary process. We have a semi-closed primary process. So in other words, we think we're putting Democrats, we think we're putting Democrats up, but we're really not, because independents can come in, Republicans can come in. And so at the end of the day, when you have a semi-closed system, you're not really doing it the way a lot of states do, which is a closed primary where Democrats put their Democrat candidate up, Republicans put their Republican, and let it go, and just let it go. We don't have that system. We have such a hybrid, and people, I think, are turned off to it, which is why we're down to 16 and 18% turnout. We haven't been over 20% since I actually admired Ambassador Paolino's work on that. In 1990, I was the state chairman at the time. I remember vividly, 167,800 people voted in that primary, the highest of all time. We had 536,000 registered voters, 31%. Absolute high watermark. We haven't been over 20% in this decade.
What if we did a jungle primary in November and then had a runoff 3 weeks or a month later?
It would be something to consider. You mean use the Georgia or Louisiana
Georgia model.
Yeah. I mean, those states do it three steps. They have the primary, they have the general, and then they have the majority. I mean, that's a consideration. But Dr. Corvese's bill is probably the cleanest bill because you get everything done on the November election, the first Tuesday. So I think that's a cleaner way to do it. And I do think if you push the primaries up, we'd even get better participation. But that's my own personal druthers. I'm not gonna step on his parade.
I will step on Dr. Corvese's parade. Thank you very much, Mr. DeVault. I appreciate that.
Chairman?
I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the first chairman that I ever served under as secretary of the party for his testimony today. Thank you.
That's admitting your age, Doc. I'm not sure that's a smart thing to do.
Any further questions for Mr. Dufault? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There are no further witnesses signed up for testimony on 6622, so that will conclude that hearing. We next move to Chairman Solomon's bill. Oh. Oh, I'm sorry, Chairman. Who do you have on the phone? Okay. I don't have a name. John? John? Maybe not. Mr. Marion? Try again. John, are you there? All right, maybe we'll try. Is he there? John, can you hear us?
Hello,
Mr. Marion?
this is Dave Caldwell.
Oh, Dave Caldwell, all right. How are you, Mr. Caldwell?
I'm doing well, Mr. Chairman. How are you?
Good. We're here discussing Chairman Corvese's Bill 6622, and you have the floor to testify.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dave Caldwell. I'm a native Rhode Islander and URI graduate, but I spent 10 years in California in San Diego while in the Marine Corps between 1998 and 2008. So I was there watching the same debate take place in California that we are now having here in Rhode Island. In general, I left before the law was passed and went into effect, but it seems to me, from what I'm told, the general electorate has had more influence on the choosing of the legislative members, and this has generally been considered a successful reform to make sure all slates are filled at election time and voter turnout has increased. So I'd just like to say I saw this out where I used to live, and I am in favor of legislation of this nature, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any of me.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Caldwell? No questions. Thank you for calling in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other witnesses signed up? No other witnesses. All right, that will conclude testimony on 6622. We will now move to Chairman Solomon's Bill, 7033, which would require all candidates for office to file the same number of campaign finance reports, all due at the same times, whether or not they have had or have a contested primary election.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As you stated, this bill does require all candidates for office to file the same number of reports, the campaign finance reports. One thing I truly believe in is transparency in our campaign finance system. And that's what this bill does, because what I believe to be that there is a loophole in the filing system. Specifically, if a candidate were to declare after the June 30th period and not have a primary, the first report that they would be filing would be 28 days before the general election. Thus, an individual who has been raising money for months would not be filing the report. This bill closes that loophole and requires everybody to file the same amount of reports, whether they have a primary or not, rather than just finding out at the last 28 days before an election, where a person could have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars and there would be no, there's no transparency as it stands today. Thank you.
Any questions? Representative Newberry.
As someone who's never had to file as many reports, I would hate this bill, but I think it's a good idea, for the reasons you stated. I mean, it is, because I've noticed that before, like, you really have no idea what people have once they file, even if they're in office, once they file that June, the second quarter thing. And it's a month before the election, doesn't tell you anything.
Well, as you say, Representative, you still file your quarterly report on a normal basis. However, a new candidate doesn't file that report for months ahead of time. So there is a baseline for where your campaign finance would be for existing candidates or candidates who may have declared or started raising funds before that time frame. But for the person who, doesn't declare until right at the deadline, it opens up a campaign finance account on July 1st. It's a very extended period of time, so.
But it's not even it's not even new candidate. I'm saying as a declared candidate. I don't have to file, if I don't have a primary opponent, I don't have to file, I can file on, you know, June, or July 1 or whatever. And then I don't have to file again. I don't know if it's 28 days before, if it's the end of the third quarter, it's almost the same time frame anyway. So it's a valid point. Right as you're leading up to the election, people can be raising God knows what from who knows where, and it kind of defeats the sunlight purpose of the reports, which is the only reason to file them in the first place, right?
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments for Chairman Solomon? Thank you.
Thank you.
We don't have any witnesses signed up on that bill, so that concludes the hearing on House Bill 7033. Next bill we'll move to is Representative Lombardi's. He's got a couple of bills tonight. Representative Lombardi, do you want to start off with House Resolution 7031, which proposes an amendment to the state constitution to allow for term limits for General Assembly members?
Chairman, it may be easy if we start with 7146. I don't want to dictate the tempo,
Of course.
because
We'll
it's going to
put
be a lot easier.
7146 in
Yeah,
play
that
as,
one's a lot.
as
Mr.
well.
Chairman, would anyone be offended if I remove my mask?
Sure.
Everyone.
Oh, no,
would-
nobody's going to,
Everyone.
I don't,
would-
I shouldn't say that.
Thank you, I'll put up.
While you're speaking,
No.
you can remove
Thank
your
you.
mask.
Is anyone going to be offended if I do this? Okay, thank you, everyone. So this is a very simple bill. It's basically giving full faith and credit. And this act would enable the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority to work with the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority to allow commuter rail passes to be used as dual passes for both RIPTA and MBTA. Oftentimes, people don't have the funds to get on a new line when you're going to another state and pay. So this is basically just full faith and credit. That's all it is, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I think it's a very simple bill, but I'll try. I will endeavor to answer questions if you have any.
Any questions, Chairman Corvese?
Great bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I've arrived. I've reached nirvana.
Representative Knight?
I just want to say, I don't know why we can't do this, because we do it with Easy Pass already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's simple.
I don't even know why they need authority. They should just do it.
Amen. Maybe it's the sponsor.
Representative Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. They just want to work with you. That's why they're asking you to introduce legislation. They love you like we love you, so hey, that's why. But no, I just want to say I'm in full support of this bill. As someone who commuted for 4 years, taking from the train to Boston for law school, that would have made my life so much easier and economical. And I know for others who also commute, it's going to be the same thing. So thank you for submitting this legislation, and I'm happy to be in support.
Thank you. May I respond to the
Of course.
representative? Sure. Only thing I could say, Rep. Felix, is I'm like a broken clock. I'm right twice a day. Mr. Chairman?
All right, let's not test our luck then. You have another bill.
Well, that's why I'm going to, I'm wallowing in the.
Do you want to discuss 7031
A-
now?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is a bill that I've put in. I guess I'm known as Mr. Term Limits. And there's several reasons why I do it. And I've been doing it ever since I got here now. And one of the impetuses we did was because of what happened in Providence several years ago. And, but that's not the main interest. You know, we talk about getting people more engaged. And the way you do that is by new candidates. There's a whole new lifeblood. I mean, the ambassador talked about, you know, the mayoral, but even in my neighborhood, for example, the council race a few years ago, the winner achieved about 740 votes. The second person had about 500. The third person had about 300. The fourth person had about 200. And the last person had about 90. I mean, I'm kind of glad who won, but that's, you know, just, I'm sorry, I got a little bit of a bias when it comes to that. But, you know, what this does, it gets people, people are concerned that the lobbyists are going to take over. No, that's not what happens. Is it constitutional? Yes, it's been tried and tested in Providence. It works well. And, you know, what you're going to have in Providence, for example, not only are you going to have a new mayor, you're definitely going to have 7 new council members, but they're thinking that you may have as many as 10. So, again, it's a lifeblood. It's you know, new people getting involved, and you know, and take it from someone who sat in the seat for 27 years. You know what? It was probably time that I had to leave. I should have left. So, you know when it is, but this just changes things around. So department heads don't take over. Lobbyists certainly don't take over, because with department heads, when you get a new mayor, and we're going to have one in Providence, for example, you put your own people in. You have to have your own people around. So again, it's new ideas. It's a lifeblood. You talk about getting people engaged. I think this gets engaged. Again, it would start, 2 years after the next election, and then you have 12 more years. You got 14 years. But just think, if you already had 20 years in, that's 36 years. 34 years. I mean, do you really want to be here for 34 years? God bless you if you do. Well, Rev Kennedy, because you got a fancy name, so that's why. Some of us, besides, you don't like Shvuyadel, so that's another thing. But anyway, so yeah, so I think it just creates new blood, new impetus for where we're going. And again, it does pass constitutional muster, or it certainly can. I'll endeavor to answer any questions if I am able to. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'm sorry if I took up too much time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Never. Thank you, Representative Lombardi. Next bill we're going to move to comes from Representative Place, who had a baby boy today, so he's not able to be with us. It's a bill that we heard last year, House Bill 6661. It would require that the primary election date, typically the 8th Tuesday preceding the biennial state elections, shall be held on the Wednesday immediately following Labor Day, only if the 8th Tuesday immediately follows Labor Day. What it essentially does is when the election falls, the primary election falls the day after a holiday, it moves it one day further out, and this would save a lot of money and expenses for costs for municipalities in setting up the election, because they have to pay people overtime to come in and work on Monday. There was no testimony in opposition to it last year, I don't believe. There are no witnesses signed up on it. Yes, Representative Nardone? Yes, I believe so.
So it's already been going through the House, it's already passed, so it's just something that's
Yes.
Happened, excuse me, Representative Nardone, I think that did happen one election cycle, where we voted on a Wednesday and not a Tuesday.
Yes, but I believe that was because it was a
Holiday?
Yeah, it was a Jewish holiday, I believe. There are no witnesses signed up on this bill, so that will, is there any comments or questions from members of the committee? Yeah.
This is a pretty good bill. David explained this to me. Essentially what it does is it saves your town money by not having to, that's what it is. He explained exactly the dynamics of it and how it saves money. It's not, that explanation, I'm sorry. That explanation is not readily available in my head, but this is something that's going to save municipalities money.
Overtime costs for the day before setting up. Okay, any further comments or questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, that will conclude testimony on House Bill 6661. The final bill on our calendar comes to us from Representative Agello, House Bill 6601. This bill would include the General Assembly elections within the category of elections subject to the risk-limiting audits within the jurisdiction of the Board of Elections. Representative Agello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have introduced this legislation for a couple years now. It is follow-up on the original legislation, working with Common Cause and other good government groups towards establishing risk-limiting audits within the jurisdiction of the Board of Elections. We were only the second state in the country to have authorize the Board of Elections to take these looks at elections and determine when maybe the outcome doesn't seem like it quite makes sense, so they audit a small number of ballots, and if those ballots don't agree with the result, they look at more and more and more. This is thought to be really the best thing to be doing after elections to make sure that the ballot count is accurate, or as accurate as possible. As I said, we were just the second state in the country to adopt the risk auditing practice. And in that legislation, when we passed it, we wrote ourselves out. They're authorized for local elections and statewide elections and questions on the ballot, but not legislative races. It was an accident, I believe, and John Marion and I have talked about it and agree both that it was an oversight on our part. So, would like to correct that little piece.
Makes sense to me. I believe Mr. Marion is available to testify via telephone. Mr. Marion? Taken hostage by an alien. Mr. Marion, are you there?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman.
Perfect. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't join you in person.
That's okay. We're discussing Representative Agello's bill, and you have the floor.
Great. Thank you. I'll be brief. This bill was introduced at our request to fix an error in the original 2017 law that requires risk limiting audits. It passed the House in this committee last year, and we are hoping that it will pass again this year. Quite frankly, I authored the original law and made an error when I didn't allow for audits of General Assembly races. So this literally just changes 2 words in the law to clarify that these audits can be conducted on races for the state legislature. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from members of the committee for Mr. Marion? No questions. Thank you, John.
Thank you, and thank you to Representative Agello for introducing this bill.
All right. That will conclude testimony on House Bill 6601 in our calendar for this evening. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved and seconded. Thank you.